These days, you don't have to look very far to learn about hidden gems on the TurboGrafx, but anybody who's been into that system for very long knows the ceiling of collecting for that system can greatly expand if you're willing to tap into the Japanese library, where the system is known as the PC Engine and has way more games due to the fact that it was just more successful over there. Luckily, PC Engine HuCard games can be played easily on any North American TurboGrafx. You just need one of these converters. You could also just import a PC Engine. Either way is fine, but I tend to stick with my converter on my American system since that's the one that I have rigged up for a component signal, but to each their own on that. Once you are ready to get some PC Engine games, it can be tricky to figure out which games to get, as many of them require you to be able to read Japanese, and some of them just aren't that great. So that's where I come in. Over the years, I've discovered many excellent hidden gems on the PC Engine, and today I'm gonna share some of those with you. Congratulations! Legend of Hero Tonma is an Irem game on the PC Engine, and it's an aggressive little platformer that mixes the look and the feel of a Wonder Boy game with the challenge of a fairly difficult shooter and the absolute bullshit of one-hit kills that deplete all of your upgrades. The game is pretty generous with how it scatters power-ups all over the place though, so you can gain most of what you lost back fairly quickly. It seems super tough at first, and it is kind of a tough game, but after a little bit of memorization, you should be able to get the hang of what the game expects of you. Overall, the graphics and the music are pretty average, but they get the job done. The big draw with this game for me is the challenge itself. It has a way of making you feel just powerful enough to keep going, but never quite so much that you can ever really let your guard down. You will die and you will lose your weapons often, but as I mentioned before, you can get many upgrades back fairly quickly with a little bit of bobbing and weaving after you respawn. So it's got a really nice balance to it. Unfortunately, the price for the game has gone up considerably since I got mine for about 30 bucks. Now the cheapest one that I can find is 75, but maybe that's a normal price and mine was just 30 bucks because it looks like it was some Japanese dog's chew toy for a little while before I got it. Works fine though. And yeah, technically there is a North American version of this game for the TurboGrafx, but maybe stick with the PC Engine one. Another interesting game on the PC Engine is Mr. Heli. Kind of like Legend of Hero Tonma, Mr. Heli has fairly average music and graphics and is mostly interesting because of its gameplay. You shoot straight, shoot up, and drop bombs below you to kill enemies and break rocks to reveal power-ups and crystals. The Mr. Heli character definitely reminds me of Opa with his little feet. They even control about the same too. The enemies are nearly constant and can become overwhelming very quickly if you don't stay on top of them, so the game generally keeps you busy and going all over the screen all the time. And the levels will start and stop auto-scrolling on a whim, while also going back and forth from horizontal and vertical paths, which can all seem like it would be a little bit jarring, but I found that I was able to adjust to it fairly quickly and appreciate the variety that it brings to the levels. The game was designed around these things, so it works really well. I highly recommend this one. Nope, my game isn't messed up. That's the intro screen. Kind of hypnotizing after a while. Hani or Hani on the Road is an interesting platformer that definitely does its own thing. Not entirely sure who Hani is, or why he's here, or what his deal is in general, but I like him. Or her. And apparently Hani's got a friend named Lemon that becomes active if you've got a second player with you. So it's Hani and Lemon. Why not? The game could have been interesting enough if it played it safe from there, but it actually does some things that are fairly unique for the genre. For starters, the levels are broken up into several different tracks that Hani can jump between, kind of like Frogger. Now, a lot of the time you could stay on one track if you wanted to and get through most of the levels, but if you don't want to miss out on the vast majority of the items, you're going to be hopping across all of the tracks to grab them. Making things a little more treacherous are the enemy placements and random gaps in the ground, and the fact that most of the layers scroll at different speeds. All of these things happening at once can make things pretty hectic as you try to keep up with it all, and the later levels can get real crazy real fast. So it's easy to die a bunch of times in a row and get a game over if you lose control of what you're doing. So you really need to focus, which is not my personal strong suit. The only real complaint I have with this game is that it can get a little repetitive at times and sort of overstays its welcome, since all the levels only have 1 or 2 enemy types, there's hardly any alternate weapons at all, and there's just not a whole lot of meat on the bone. Some occasional boss fights and some calmer levels that don't auto-scroll do help a bit, but ultimately it can get a little long in the tooth, at least for me. So it's best enjoyed in short bursts, in my opinion. Even still, I like the game a lot for its weirdness and its unique take on platformers. It definitely has a place in your PC Engine collection. Psycho Chaser is one of the PC Engine's more unique shooters, and initially caught my eye because it was published by Naxat, the same company that brought us the excellent Alien and Devil's Crush for North America. But Psycho Chaser never made it over, which is a shame because it's a pretty great top-down shooter. The PC Engine is well known for having lots of games in this genre, but Psycho Chaser stands out with its unique soundtrack, large detailed sprites, and a relatively in-depth power system that you can access between levels. And hey, what's not to like about controlling a giant marauding android instead of a more typical looking spaceship? As with most shooters from this era, it starts off simple and eventually gets hard as balls, so don't expect to blast your way through it on the first try, or the second, or the 15th. One weird thing is that I'm not really sure what some of the power-ups do. Like this one, for instance, seems like it would increase your firepower, right? Well, as far as I can tell, it doesn't. I'm not really sure what it does. The arrows definitely speed you up though. That much I can put together. Psycho Chaser is far from the best shooter on the PC Engine, but I like its aesthetic and its tone. It tries a couple things a little differently, and it's a neat addition to any PC Engine collection for that alone. But thankfully, it's also really challenging, and it's fun for me to inch my way through it despite how terrible I am. It's also got some nice sort of darker music that kind of reminds me of Legendary Axe 2 or something. As long as we're talking about shooters, I cannot leave out Image Fight. This is one that's a little bit more well known in the importing community, so maybe it's not so much of a hidden gem as much as it's just a regular gem. But it is certainly one of the best PC Engine shooters you can get. It plays a lot more like a typical top-down shooter like the Star Soldier games, but it also stands among those in my opinion. It's definitely an IRAM game. You can tell by that exclamation point, which I'm pretty sure that is in every IRAM game ever made. But more of a telltale sign is the music and the sound effects that definitely have that somewhat tingy IRAM sound, but the music tracks themselves are quite good despite their lack of attention to the low end of the sound spectrum. I like the power-up system too. It's not as varied as some other shooters, but it's easy to get into, and it's fun to experiment with different weapons as well as the dynamic and static pods to make your ship as deadly as possible. I also like being able to choose between 4 different ship speeds at any given time, instead of waiting around for speed power-ups. This makes coming back from a death slightly less discouraging than other games in the genre. I highly recommend this one to anybody who likes top-down spaceship shooters, and it's a real shame that this one didn't come out in the West. I think it would have done really well. Apologizing ahead of time for mispronouncing the name of the game, but Bungou Chamakun is one of the goofiest games on the PC Engine, and I kind of love it. On the surface, it seems like it would be a pretty average side-scrolling platformer. It's very colorful, it has typical looking water levels, bouncy music, but once you play it for more than a few minutes, you'll quickly start to notice some very weird elements creep their way into the experience. For instance, when you crouch, you turn into this thing for some reason, and the power-ups range from a nearly naked bodybuilder guy who headbutts enemies for you, a little crying boy who throws meat cleavers for you, to other upgrades that turn you into a weird bat thing that lets you fly over levels, and my personal favorite, an acorn that summons what can only be described as a Hasidic Jewish attack helicopter that shoots enemies for you for as long as it's on the screen. I mean, look, there's even a Star of David on the side of it, so I guess that's what it is. Look at this thing. Look at what's happening on the screen right now. What is this? On top of all that, Bungou Chamakun has a hilarious assortment of enemies that could only have come from the depths of some psychotic Japanese fever dream. As I understand it, this game is based on an old manga from the 80s, so maybe there is some context somewhere that would make some of this make some sense, but honestly, I'd kind of prefer to just not understand it. I like the utter madness of it all. The lack of a health bar and any semblance of a checkpoint system can be a little annoying, as any one hit will send you all the way back to the beginning of the level, but thankfully, continues appear to be limitless and the game controls well, so you shouldn't have too much trouble after a little bit of level memorization. I also really like the wacky music. I think it complements what's going on the screen quite a bit. I would even go so far as to call some of the tunes outstanding with how catchy they can get. Well, there you have it. Those are some hidden gems for the PC Engine. I have a handful more and I'm still discovering more. I hope I've made a compelling case for you to get into the PC Engine at least a little bit. And if you're already into it and you know of some hidden gems that I didn't mention, feel free to mention them in the comments below. I'm always looking for more and I'd love to do another video on this topic. But until then, thanks for watching.